Yvonne, what's happening in the judiciary? And this week, I think yesterday it was, we saw a list of 13 people who've applied for position of Chief Justice and 9 who've applied for position of Supreme Court Judge. That is to replace Justice Ojwang, who's retired, and of course David Maraga. But very interesting developments there. Linus, and I'll start with you, that the closest we come to the judiciary here, that actually none of the Supreme Court judges found it important, necessary to actually apply. I mean, there's no requirement that they should, but it strikes us rather odd.
Quite odd, Joe, that judges of the Supreme Court do not want to rise to the position of President of the Supreme Court. It's quite odd, but also quite a statement about the current environment in the judiciary. The environment right now is not considered that friendly. And we have seen it in how David Maraga was treated. We have seen it in the very contested position of acting Chief Justice. We have seen it in the potential divisions within the JSC on how to proceed after Maraga. The environment is not that good. And I'm not surprised that the very experienced, some of the very experienced names in the judiciary have not offered their application at this time. Because I think some of them see this as a transitional process. This appointment is being made a year to the end of the term of President Uhuru Kenyatta, meaning then that there'll be a lot of politics at play. There'll be a lot of interests that will be at conflict. And I think some of the judges are just choosing not to be caught up in the middle of this. Wait it out. August 2022 will come in, and the country will transition to another political environment, hopefully, and they see how to proceed from there.
Absolutely. Francis, when you looked at that list, what went through your mind? I mean, there are names that people were expecting there they didn't see. There are names that probably wondered, why is that there even?
The last 2 interviews for the Chief Justice demonstrated something, that a lot of stuff is said about the applicants. And I would think that most of the would-be applicants probably were reluctant to put their names there for maybe fear that quite some unsavory things may be said. And, you know, it's a public place, so a lot of things can be said about you. And what is also interesting is that only 4 judges applied for the position of Chief Justice out of the 13 applicants. 9 are outsiders, so to say. Only 4 are from the bench. That should also tell us something, that you would have expected that quite a number of judges would aspire to rise to the position of Chief Justice. But probably because of the very vicious political interests at play here. Because, truth be told, the choice of a Chief Justice now will be made with next year's general election in mind. And there are specific reasons for that. There are quite a number of issues that probably will find themselves or their way into court. And so the Chief Justice also has some serious powers in terms of even constituting benches and so on and so forth. So quite a number of things related to the election before and even after will find their way into the court. And so quite some interest will be at play in the choice of the next Chief Justice. Number 2, the whole question of a presidential election petition. I wouldn't be surprised, once again, if there is a presidential election petition. And so the choice of the next Chief Justice, which is also the President of the Supreme Court, that has the sole responsibility to hear and determine presidential election petitions, is also an interesting thing to look at. Remember also there is another vacancy there left by Justice Ojwang. So there are 2 judges in that bench that are going to be filled. With a presidential election petition in mind next year, expect a lot of politics at play. Not necessarily you would say the most deserving, I would think it will be the most politically correct.
Yvonne, that is interesting because Professor Makau Mutua, I think, is one of the people that, he may have indicated, but a lot of people are expecting him to apply because last time he tried. But then he tweeted something very interesting. I don't know if you saw it, but he said that upon reflection, having looked at the tenure of Willie Mutunga and David Maraga, he thought that it is not possible to be both effective and independent as a Chief Justice in Kenya.
Precisely.
Well, who would blame him and others who might have shied away from that? Look at what Chief Justice David, or rather the retired Chief Justice David Maraga had to go through. There was the revisit and the very strong political rhetoric that came from the president and the deputy president, the two who are leading, the other arm of government. Then we saw the reduced budgets that took place after, which was just basically following up the words with action. I don't know if many of us remember, Maraga cutting that lone figure, standing on the steps of the Supreme Court, lamenting about all of the things that were being done to him, about him being ignored at public functions. I believe it was one of those end of, was it Jamhuri Day?
It was
Mashujaa Day in Mombasa, where he was completely ignored. And then you see, even with the BBI, the introduction of an ombudsman of the judiciary. And one has to only take a look at what Maraga looked like at his retirement. He was a happy man. I mean, I don't think I'd ever seen him like that throughout his tenure. He was dancing, he was jovial, he was with his wife. It almost seemed like this mighty load had been taken off his shoulders. And I guess for him it was, I've done my thing, I've run my race, I can now ride off into the sunset. But it truly was tough, maybe from somebody that people hardly expected, David Maraga to be this man, even though we saw, a bit of that sort of grit, at the beginning when he was being, vetted for the position. And I think his are going to be tough shoes to fill, certainly, for what he has withstood throughout his term and throughout the administration currently. So, I mean, there's definitely going to be quite a bit that comes ahead for the next season.
Joe, an independent judiciary is a good thing for all of us. It's a good thing for the country. And it's all eyes now on the Judicial Service Commission and the commissioners therein to make the right choices. I hope we will be allowed to beam these proceedings live during the interviews and vetting of these applicants, so that at the end of it, Kenyans are also able to make a decision on who they think presented themselves as better candidates, more knowledgeable in terms of what is happening, the understanding of matters, justice and everything else. But ultimately, I hope the choice will be someone who will continue the push for an independent judiciary. Because politics aside, the judiciary is where we all go to seek solace. When you have a quarrel with the government of the day, or even interpersonal quarrels here, we all go to the judiciary. So I really hope that the choice of the next Chief Justice and the judge of the Supreme Court will be guys who can properly push for an independent judiciary. Otherwise, we will be going back instead of going forward.
Linus, I will give you the last word here, but just paint for us a picture, that context in which this is going to happen, what the JSC looks like right now, and what some of those dynamics, as it were, might be as we head to this choice that is so critical for the country.
Now, the JSC is a very contested space. You will see that whenever there is a vacancy within JSC, it's a do or die contest. We remember the LSK elections that, were riddled with a lot of things that should not be associated with LSK because it's a high stakes place. And here is the composition. I'll just go through this very quickly, Joe. The current membership includes Dr. Mercy Deche. She's an advocate, and she's representing the LSK, and she's the vice chair of the JSC. And then we have Justice Philomena Mwilu, who is the acting Chief Justice and Deputy Chief Justice. She is representing judges of the Supreme Court. Then we have Justice Warsame Mohammed, who is a Court of Appeal judge and is representing the Court of Appeal in the JSC. Then we do have Justice David Majanja. He is a judge of the High Court of Kenya, and is representing judges of the High Court. Then you have Justice retired Paul Kihara Kariuki, the Attorney General, who is an ex-official member who sits in the JSC. It gets interesting in the following names again. You have Patrick Gishoi. Remember the retired clerk of the National Assembly. Yeah. Is representing the Public Service Commission. And then we have this is a new member, Honorable Evelyn Olwande. She's representing the magistrates. And then from the LSK, you have Masharia Njeru. Then you have Felix Kiptarus Koskei, former Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture. Yeah. He is nominated by the President and representing members of the public. And then you have finally Professor Olive Mugenda, who is nominated by the President and representing members of the public. Now, here is the small print you need to be mindful of. The people nominated by the President will obviously, do the bidding of the President. And then the ex-official members, like the
Attorney General?
The Attorney General, he would be working with government. So if government has a candidate, then you would expect these numbers to go that way. You'd expect Professor Mugenda, you expect Kosgei, Masharia Njeru, you'd expect the likes of Patrick Gishoi and the Attorney General to vote in one way. One would have thought the judges and the magistrates would be on one side. Ideally, that would be the way it balances out. The people who are coming from outside the judiciary and those who are inside, that's magistrates and judges. And judges. But the dynamics are completely different. We should also be looking at things like, we should be looking at things like the impact of the handshake, for example. Just an example. Would it go in there? I'm not going to bet on any of that, because we would have seen the handshake playing out in other things like cabinet appointments, in diplomatic circles. I think this will go the way it will go. And I don't think it will be the handshake. So in short, we're expecting to see a Judiciary Service Commission, JSC, that will vote along the interests and along the lines on which members are appointed there. So it's going to be very, very interesting. And Joe, very quickly, just on some of the names that have applied, you have Justice Ouko, who was formerly
the Registrar of the High Court, and he's the President of the Court of Appeal.
Court of Appeal. So he is an experienced hand in terms of being part of the judiciary. And then you have Fred Ngatia, who is a very brilliant lawyer. We've seen him through 2 presidential election petitions. Very solid performance on the bar. And in my view, I think those 2 would be the main contestants. The list is long. I don't know where to place Justice Chitembwe. Said Chitembwe, I don't know where to place.
Let's just be brutal here. It is difficult to place quite a number of those people. I mean, they're just, apart from the 2 you mentioned, you probably would just mention 1 or 2 others, and the list would really end there.
And Justice that much I'm looking forward to knowing who Professor Otinga Moare is and Ombongi Brian Matagaro.
Aliciano.
No, Aliciano, we've seen her before. She has applied before for judge.
Professor Mbote is also a very accomplished,
very solid
academician in legal circles.
Well, quite brilliant. I guess the questions they would be asking her there would be, which ruling have you written, which are like the whole
from
thing
academia
about
to
experience
practice,
and everything, because I think there are people who are increasingly now beginning to talk about that. Obviously, you cannot take that away from Professor Kameri Mbote. I mean, I know her for many years. She's a brilliant legal scholar, and so we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's quite interesting.